September 26, 2012. This is Justice Done Under Cheap. We're heading down to the so-called Justice Building today. I have scheduled a plea hearing. I didn't schedule it, but I'm scheduled to be there. And what's interesting about this is the first hearing I went to regarding this matter. It's regarding a bylaw of not wearing a helmet in public parks, which is interesting. I'll provide more information in the description area, but what it is basically they claim I wasn't wearing a helmet in a public park, and I was on a bicycle. So what's interesting about this is, according to the Provincial Offences Procedure Act of New Brunswick, a judge does not have the jurisdiction nor the authority to issue a summons when a procedure is started by a notice of prosecution until after the first hearing. Now, the first hearing, that date is supposed to be on the notice of prosecution when it's served on a defendant at the time that the offense is discovered. As an example, if the Fredericton Police Force sees someone violating a bylaw for not wearing a helmet in a public park, well, they're supposed to fill out a ticket and a corresponding notice of prosecution. The ticket will have the date of the hearing if the individual wishes to contest the ticket, and they receive also a notice of prosecution, or a copy of a notice of prosecution. Now, it's only when the notice of prosecution is filed with the court does the actual judicial process then begin. And what's interesting is, according to the Provincial Offences Procedure Act, the notice of prosecution must be filed no later than the first date for the first hearing, which is a plea hearing, which would be on the ticket and the corresponding notice of prosecution. Now, that's according to the Provincial Offences Procedure Act. It's right there in the Act. And what's interesting, when you look up the power that a provincial court judge has to issue a summons, they only get or receive or can exercise the power to issue a summons after someone fails to appear. It's under the heading failure to appear. And specifically, tickets, bylaw matters are under tickets of the Provincial Offences Procedure Act. They're supposed to be started by a notice of prosecution being filed, and it has to be filed with the judge no later than the date of the first hearing, which is the first plea hearing, and that date should be on the ticket and the notice of prosecution. Now, only after someone fails to appear at the initial plea hearing does the judge get the jurisdiction, the powers to issue a summons under the Provincial Offences Procedure Act. Now, in my case, I was never issued a notice of prosecution. The ticket had no date where I could contest the ticket if I so chose, and the notice of prosecution was never filed. It was not filed with the court at all. It was not filed with the judge before the first date of the plea hearing, which is August 15, 2012. I appeared that day and demanded that the court explain whether there was a notice of prosecution or not before her. And I asserted that to the point of being dragged by my heels out of the courtroom. And the judge just didn't seem to understand why I was demanding to see a notice of prosecution. And the reason for it is, if there's no notice of prosecution at the date of the first plea hearing, then the matter is dismissed, or should be dismissed, because the judge has no jurisdiction to move forward according to the Provincial Offences Procedure Act. And what's really interesting is that people don't realize a court, what's considered a lower court, would be, in this case, the Provincial Court of New Brunswick is a lower court. They do not have inherent jurisdiction. In comparison, we can compare that to a Court of Queen's Bench in New Brunswick, which is considered a Superior Court of New Brunswick. The Superior Court has jurisdiction unless it can be shown otherwise. So there's an assumed jurisdiction. The opposite is true for a provincial court. So in this case, the provincial court has no jurisdiction except what can be shown specifically by statute. In this case, the statute referring to is the Provincial Offences Procedure Act of New Brunswick. And in my case specifically, the judge issued a summons without, I believe, without jurisdiction to do so, because I did not miss the first hearing. There was not even a date for a hearing on the ticket, nor was I served a notice of prosecution. So the procedure didn't even commence. The wording of the Act is quite clear that the procedure actually commences when a notice of prosecution is filed with the court, and no later than the date of the first hearing for a plea hearing. So in this case, I believe the judge had no jurisdiction to issue me a summons, which gave a date for the first hearing. Then there was no jurisdiction for the court to continue on past the first hearing date when there was no notice of prosecution filed, and none filed at least before the date of the first hearing. Now the court refused to answer my question that day and had me instead just dragged out of the courtroom. But today, hopefully we'll have this answer very clear. If there's no notice of prosecution, the matter should be dismissed. I filed a notice of application to a provincial court judge with a corresponding affidavit and a brief which gives a very clear explanation of how the court did not have jurisdiction to begin with. If they did, they lost jurisdiction. I have yet to plea regarding this matter, so I'm challenging the jurisdiction of the court by a process known as special appearance. Special appearance is when you're appearing before a judge but not under a general appearance, because if you appear generally, it's taken to be that you've agreed to the jurisdiction of the court. I'm challenging the jurisdiction of the court, so the way I do that is I appear by way of special appearance. It's a very interesting legal concept. It's not used very often, but I'm asserting it here. I've provided in my brief all the case law substantiate my position, and a really great write-up for the court to consider, and I'll be posting links to it in the video so everyone can actually read through the brief and decide for yourself whether my legal position is valid or not. It's written in a way that everyone should understand. Looking forward to comments on the submission, on the brief, and you can also read the corresponding notice of application and affidavit in support of it. So thank you for listening. Have a great day. It's Justice Dunder Chief, about to walk into the so-called Justice Building for a 1:30 hearing regarding a bylaw matter of not wearing a helmet in the city of Fredericton. Thank you.